What is crack-lacking, fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale. Let's talk James Harden and the Philadelphia 76ers. Shams and Woj and Sam Amick of The Athletic as well. They had not competing news updates, but it was updates. It was a material update. So if anyone hasn't seen, Woj reported that the Sixers have ended trade talks with the disgruntled James Harden and that they are going with him into training camp. Conversely, Sam Amick had reported, and I believe even Woj or maybe it was Shams reported that James Harden won't show up to training camp. Sam Amick had reporting that, didn't refute that, but said it's not clear whether Harden will show up to training camp if he's still on the Sixers. He still wants a trade. The Clippers remain his preferred destination. This is not significant in the sense of you don't stop trade talks. Like the trade talks are never done. If there's a team that wants to make an offer for James Harden, they can call the Sixers and make an offer for James Harden. And so this is just very much a leverage play to get the information out there that, no, we're prepared to go into training camp with him and we're prepared to make this awkward. And normally I would say that they're bluffing in most cases, but we've seen Daryl Morey do this before, and not 2 years ago, basically, with the Ben Simmons stuff. And I would argue because James Harden, some of his playoff unevenness is fresh in the minds of everyone. He's coming off a year in which you could say, hey, he was fringe All-NBA. Most of the catch-all analytics had him as a certified All-NBA player. There's value there. He's headed into free agency, but you will get his bird rights. You can't extend him, whatever. So it's just, I would expect Daryl Morey to, if he needs to or doesn't get the offer he wants, let this leak into training camp. And then that becomes the issue of, okay, James Harden picked up his player option. Is he going to hold out a training camp? Is he hurting himself more than he's hurting the Sixers in that regard? Not necessarily, because worst case scenario, he could sit out next season and then just free and clear leave on the open market. But if he wants to get the most money possible, because the teams he wants to play for, ergo the Clippers, are not going to have max cap space next summer, you need a trade almost. And so, you could hope the Sixers would facilitate a sign and trade since you would be there on your own free will. But again, the Clippers are not set up to complete a sign and trade. And the Sixers clearly aren't interested in, I won't even say the bare bones package, but from all the reporting, even if the Clippers put everything on the table, you could trade up to a first round pick. Terrence Mann is in there, a bunch of expirings. It doesn't feel like that would get the job done. And this is going to get very ugly insofar as you don't think it's gotten ugly already, because maybe this speeds up negotiations, but if you're the Sixers and you're prioritizing cap space next summer or this monster return, you're kind of limited in the scope of offers you can accept. And so the Clippers can help you with the cap space element, but that also kind of means you can figure it out later, but maybe the single best asset that you would have in that trade is Terrence Mann. Are you going to want his $11 million or whatever it is on the books? I would absolutely take it if you're going to accept that offer. But if you're just going to get a first round pick and Terrence Mann for James Harden and then a bunch of expirings, that gets tough to say, okay, is next year more than a gap year for us? At the same time, we have not heard, at least in droves, of other teams that are going to be interested in James Harden. The Knicks were loosely linked to him at the beginning. I doubt they would throw out a Godfather offer for him. We kind of heard some Miami noise, but that was, it's in the middle of the Dame stuff. And that's another aspect of this that could be holding up the James Harden negotiations is Miami specifically, but I'm sure there are other teams out there. You want to see where Damian Lillard goes because he is going to be the bigger get right now. He's not going to be a free agent. And I think, I don't want to say that he's outright the better player. I think he's the more proven playoff performer. That's for sure. And I think you can make the case that he's the better player. That's an interesting one. Harden versus Lillard. The playmaking for Harden is better than Lillard's, but just Lillard's outside shooting and him being more familiar playing off the ball, I can understand why that would appeal to other teams more. But we're also talking about two players where the scope of their trade requests, demands, whatever you want to call it, are one team. So are either of these two going to open it up? And that's what James Harden could do. I don't think Morey's necessarily, and the Sixers are listening to James Harden's request. Yes, the reporting says that they've tried to talk to the Clippers or they've had discussions with the Clippers, but this isn't kind of like, it's the same thing with the Blazers, is they've made it clear that they're going to hold sort of this open court when it comes to shopping these guys. But the reporting has been so sparse on what other teams have actually called and made offers that this is why reports like this come out, is that maybe Daryl Morey and the Sixers are trying to drive up some, not 11th hour interest, but because the offseason is not necessarily over yet, but just throwing another wrinkle into the equation, a curveball into the equation to see kind of what can become of this. And I still would expect Harden to be on the Sixers for training camp, in part because, which is why this is going to get ugly. And I guess this is the long roundabout way of getting to the point of this podcast. The Sixers want to do something so specific and aggressive that I don't know that there's a team out there right now at this point in the offseason when cap space has been spent, when teams want to see who they are, when you also know that James Harden has really so far only communicated a desire to play for the Clippers, that is going to come in and be like, hey, here's expiring contracts and enough draft equity so that you can go turn around and get another player so that James Harden's departure doesn't culminate in a gap year for Joel Embiid, who that looms over everything of all this, where I think it's kind of accepted within NBA circles and even among NBA intelligentsia and just podcasters that the Sixers are probably a year away from like the Joel Embiid reckoning and his trade request. You can see what they do next offseason or what the team looks like. At the same time, if you're Joel Embiid, congratulations to him, the newly married Joel Embiid, and you're watching all of this, could it technically, if you think James Harden's going to show up out of shape, disgruntled, or not at all, does that accelerate the trade request here? I don't believe it does. And I did say on a previous podcast to hold myself accountable that I could see it doing that. But if you're James Harden, you're sitting here and you're watching what Daryl Morey did with Ben Simmons, you lived through that. And what he's saying he will do, essentially, either directly or indirectly, with the James Harden sweepstakes, let's call it. You don't want to request a trade now because he's not sending you anywhere, or the offer is just going to be so high that you're going to have to come to the season anyway. You don't want to have to deal with any blowback from fans or just the trade request looming over your head as you go into training camp. So I do not believe anymore that this is going to, I didn't give it enough thought at the time. I don't think this accelerates the Joel Embiid trade request timeline. I think what the Sixers get is an opportunity to make whatever they can out of Harden, and then you go through next offseason and you see what becomes of this team. I don't know what becomes of this team, though. I don't see how you trade James Harden and are better off in any way, shape, or form, because what you need to do to be better off is to either parlay him into a star, or you need to get enough assets to then turn around and trade for a star immediately. And I know that a lot of people speculated, would they be a team that rolls the dice on Damian Lillard? Let's assume that they would be willing to do that. You're not getting Damian Lillard for James Harden. He doesn't fit anything with the Blazers timeline. Now, you could rope in a third team. We haven't seen the third team suitors for James Harden. So are they going to send you enough to where you can turn around and then trade for Damian Lillard? And the problem there is, whatever they give you, are you still including Tyrese Maxey in a Damian Lillard trade? And does that necessitate a fourth team all of a sudden? Or is that part of the third team structure? You're not trading Harden and Maxey to the same team. So if that's the same transaction, there's a fourth team, because Maxey's about to get paid. He's a really good player. Maybe Portland would have interest in him, but you have Scoot, you have Anthony Simons, you have Shaedon Sharpe. It's already crowded with Damian Lillard, and changing him out for Tyrese Maxey in a contract year, you can't look at that and say, well, we'll just parlay him into someone else. So he's not going to be a part, or at least going to the Blazers in any Damian Lillard trade. And then you have to sit there and ask yourself, okay, are we without assets or imminent meaningful cap space if you take on Dame or Tyrese Maxey? Are we better than we are right now with disgruntled Harden, Tyrese Maxey, and the one first-round pick we could trade around Joel Embiid? I don't know. I think there's a chance that the Lillard-Embiid dynamic is better than the Harden-Embiid dynamic, especially in the playoffs. I think James Harden's passing is really important here. Joel Embiid does not need a creative passer. Him and Damian Lillard will be fine. The rest of the team, though, when you look at some of the supporting cast around them, if you're losing Tyrese Maxey and his drives and what the chaos he's going to create, he's not an exceptional passer, but it's someone who could just defer and react to the defense that's reacting to him. Damian Lillard can still do that. But if you're losing both James Harden and Tyrese Maxey to get Damian Lillard, I don't think you're this better team, especially when you, in my mind, you're not going to have enough assets left over to turn around and make all these other accessory moves, or let alone a meat and potatoes type of move. And I don't know what the Sixers' vision here is. People talk about cap space. I've seen it floated around that the Sixers could get 2 max slots carved out. No, not 2 real max slots for next summer, which are, as of right now, the lowest max slot for next summer is projected to be $35.5 million. Yes, they can get to that. They can get to almost 70 million in cap space. That's still not both those maxes. And you're also not giving out. Those are maxes reserved for restricted free agents, essentially, who are not going to leave their teams. If you're maxing out a restricted free agent who's worthwhile that you want, the other team is going to match them. Most of those players, I mean, look at, they didn't even reach restricted free agency. They're signing extensions. So you're not going to have dual max slots, but you can get to 60 plus million, 65 plus million. I had them at in cap space. Maybe that even goes up a little bit if the salary cap projections increase for next summer specifically. Perhaps they agree to raise it a little bit more in anticipation of the new TV deal a year or two down the line from that. What is cap space getting you now? It's getting you a Fred VanVleet type of player. And I've seen OG Anunoby mentioned as a name they could go after. That is not the guy. OG Anunoby is a really good player. I think I've probably downplayed his value on this podcast a couple times. I don't think he's not bad. I just don't think he's a star. He's a really good player. You don't plan your entire future around him. And so I'm starting to think that the Sixers have less leverage here when all is said and done. And I also understand, by the way, where Harden is coming from, if the reporting is true, that he wanted, that if Morey only wanted him to sign a 1+1, even if that's full max money, that's a tall order. I also get the Sixers perspective. Harden's apparently disenchanted because they didn't offer him a multi-year max deal, guaranteed money. So if we're talking 3 or 4 years, his 3-year max, 3 years and 150 about. His 4-year max would have been 4 years and 204.7 million. It's a lot of money to commit to James Harden at this stage of his career. So I understand the both sides of it from that, but I also get if you're Harden, why you wouldn't want to sign a 1+1 and why you're pissed off now. I don't know if opting in was necessarily the best decision for you because you kind of lost control of this season. I don't know how it ends, but it feels like it's going to end very poorly. And overall, while I do think the Sixers have less leverage, I think Daryl Morey has an iron stomach for this shit. And it would not surprise me if James Harden is still on the Sixers heading into next season. You can tell me he shows up out of shape. You can tell me he doesn't show up at all. You can tell me he shows up and plays his ass off because he's trying to attract, I don't know, trying to prove a point. Or maybe he's trying to attract other suitors. I don't know if there's a no-brainer team out there. Get in the YouTube comments if you made it this far, or our Discord. What's a team that you could see coming out of nowhere? Not Miami even, not the Clippers, and trying to make an offer for James Harden. This is going to get very ugly, folks. I think that we're going to go, my guess would be now that he's on the Sixers heading into training camp because Daryl Morey is not going to accept bottom dollar for him. And even some of the offers that have been floated, that the asking price that he wanted for Tobias Harris makes you think, well, what is he going to ask for with James Harden? And so even if the Clippers offer everything they can, I don't think that they're going to move him. And they do have to weigh, well, he could just leave next summer. You look at the cap space landscape and like the glitzier teams still aren't slated to have all this cap room. And many of them might not want James Harden, depending on where they are in their development or players already in place. Looking at New York with Jalen Brunson, they're not going to have max space. And he's not going to go back to Brooklyn or something if they somehow get off Ben Simmons. This is going to get ugly. I'm not necessarily sure how it ends, but while I don't read too much into this reporting, like the trade sweepstakes are not done. The Sixers have not actually shut down talks. This does lead me to believe, though, when we really just step back and kind of look at this now that things have paused, James Harden's going to be on the Sixers to start the season. This is going to get very ugly, and we should probably brace ourselves for just like, I don't even know what. Like, we need to brace ourselves for anything just feels on the table. With maybe someone does come in and give up. They have a slow start to the season and give up a ton for James Harden. Maybe he somehow finishes the season in Philly. And then we're doing kind of all this all over again next summer if he's trying to facilitate a sign and trade somewhere else. I don't know how this ends, but I will predict how it continues. And that's with the ugliness that we've kind of yet to see at this point. Until next time, and as always, shout out to Frank Ntilikina, and remember to subscribe.